The morning sun rose slowly over the hills of Ndalama, painting the small village in a golden glow. Roosters crowed, and the sound of children's laughter filled the dusty paths. In a small mud house near the river lived Miri, a woman whose hands were always busy and whose heart was always full of dreams for her twin daughters, Lela and Nia. She had been raising them alone since their father passed away when they were just babies. Each day began before sunrise. Miri would light a small fire, boil a pot of porridge and wake her daughters gently. "Time to rise, my stars," she would whisper. Lela and Nia would smile sleepily, rubbing their eyes before helping her pack vegetables into baskets. Together they walked to the market, where Miri sold tomatoes, cassava and mangoes. Life in Dalama was simple but hard. Miri's earnings were just enough to buy food and pay for the girls' school fees. But one day the village school announced that fees would increase. Miri's heart sank as she looked at the paper the teacher had given her. She knew she couldn't afford it. Her little savings were already gone, spent on books and uniforms. That night, after putting her daughters to sleep, Miri sat outside under the stars. She looked at the small house she had built with her late husband. The walls were cracked and the roof leaked during the rain, but it was their home, the only place filled with laughter and warmth. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered to the night, "How can I lose this? But how can I let my girls lose their dreams?" For many nights, Miri could not sleep. She thought of borrowing money, but no one in the village had enough to lend. She thought of finding extra work, but her tired hands could only do so much. One morning, as she looked at her daughters leaving for school, she noticed how carefully they protected their books from the wind. They were bright, kind girls who dreamed of becoming teachers. Seeing their determination gave Miri her answer, a painful one. 2 days later, she went to the town center to meet a man who bought land and homes. He looked around her house and offered her a small amount of money. It was not much, but it was enough to pay the school fees for a few years. Miri hesitated, her eyes moving from the cracked walls to the small window where the morning light always entered. Then she closed her eyes and signed the papers. That evening, when she told Lela and Nia what she had done, they both gasped. "Mama, where will we live?" Lela asked, her eyes wide with worry. Miri smiled softly, though her heart ached. "We will find a way. A home can be rebuilt, but a dream must live." They packed their things into an old basket, a few pots, clothes and their father's photo. A kind neighbor offered them a small shed near the farm where Miri sometimes worked. It was not much, but Miri told her daughters, "A small place filled with love is bigger than a house without hope." That night, the three of them lay close together on a thin mat. The wind blew softly through the cracks in the shed and Lela whispered, "Mama, are you sad?" Miri looked at her daughters and shook her head. "No, my child. I am proud. You will both study hard and one day you will build more than a house. You will build a life." Days turned into weeks. Miri worked longer hours, washing clothes for wealthier families in town and carrying heavy baskets to the market. Her hands grew rough and her back often ached, but she never complained. Each time she saw her daughters walking to school with smiles on their faces, she felt strength return to her heart. Sometimes the villagers would whisper when she passed, "That woman sold her house just for school fees," they said. "How foolish." But others admired her courage. An old woman once told her, "You have planted seeds that will one day shade this whole village." Miri smiled at those words. They gave her comfort when she felt tired and alone. One rainy afternoon, the girls returned from school soaked and cold. Miri quickly wrapped them in a blanket and gave them hot tea. "We learned about heroes today," said Nia proudly. "I told my teacher that my hero is my mother." Miri's eyes filled with tears as she hugged them both tightly. Every morning, before the sun rose, she prayed silently, asking for strength. She often told her daughters, "Work hard, my children. Your father left us with love and I give you my hope. Together, that is enough." Months passed and slowly things began to change. The twins were top of their class, winning small awards that made Miri's heart swell with pride. The teachers praised their discipline and manners. Some even began to speak kindly of Miri, saying she was a mother who had given everything for her children's future. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Miri sat outside the shed, watching her daughters read under a small lantern. The warm light fell on their faces and she felt peace. Her hands were tired, but her heart was full. "One day," she whispered to herself, "these hands will rest in a home my daughters build." The sound of crickets filled the air and a cool breeze passed through the trees. The stars appeared one by one, bright and beautiful. Miri looked up at them and smiled. The path she had chosen was not easy, but it was right. She had traded bricks and walls for dreams and hope, and that was a trade she would make again. And so, in the quiet village of Ndalama, while others counted money and land, Miri counted something far greater: faith, love, and the promise of a better tomorrow. The days after selling the house were not easy for Miri. She and her twin daughters, Lela and Nia, moved into a small shed made of old wood near the farms. The shed belonged to a kind farmer who allowed them to stay there for free, but it was small and cold. When it rained, the roof leaked, and when the wind blew, dust and dry leaves came in through the cracks. Still, Miri thanked God every night for having a place to sleep. Each morning she woke up before the first light. She swept the floor, lit a small fire outside, and boiled water for porridge. She always gave the first cup to her daughters, even when there was not enough for herself. Miri often went to bed hungry, but she never let Lela and Nia know. She smiled and said, "I already ate while cooking," though her stomach ached from emptiness. Miri worked on nearby farms, planting maize, cutting grass, and carrying heavy baskets of vegetables to the market. Her hands grew rough, her feet cracked, and her back bent from long hours in the sun. The other workers sometimes whispered about her. "That's the woman who sold her house for school fees," one would say. "She must be mad," another would add. But Miri never argued. She simply smiled and replied, "I may not have a house, but I have hope." At night, when the stars appeared, Lela and Nia would light a small candle and open their schoolbooks. They studied on a rough wooden table made from old boxes. Their clothes were worn, but their hearts were strong. Sometimes Miri watched them silently, her eyes filled with pride. She could see her own strength shining in their faces. One night, Nia looked up from her book and said, "Mama, one day we will build you a big house. You will never have to work in the fields again." Miri smiled softly and said, "My daughters, I do not need a big house. My joy is seeing you learn. That is my reward." The villagers often mocked her, calling her the woman without a home. When she passed by, some would laugh and shake their heads. But a few older people admired her courage. One grandmother in the village once told her, "You have done something only a mother with a brave heart can do." Miri bowed her head humbly and said, "I only did what love asked of me." The seasons changed, and Miri's life continued to be full of struggle. During the dry season, she walked long distances to fetch water. During the rainy season, she worked in muddy fields, her clothes soaked and her hands covered in blisters. Sometimes, her daughters would beg her to rest, but she always said, "Not yet. Rest will come later." Every day when Lela and Nia came home from school, they ran to hug their mother. They shared stories of what they learned, about numbers, words, and dreams beyond the village. Their laughter filled the small shed with warmth. Miri's tiredness always disappeared when she heard their voices. One evening, after a long day of work, Miri came home to find her daughters singing softly. The candlelight flickered as they practiced reading aloud. The air was filled with the smell of roasted maize. Miri stood by the door and listened, tears shining in her eyes. For the first time in many months she felt peace. There were hard days too. Sometimes the money she earned was not enough for food or candles. On such nights they sat in darkness and talked about the stars. Miri told her daughters stories about their father, how he used to dream of seeing them finish school. "He would be proud of you both," she whispered. Lela and Nia were not just studying, they were growing wiser. They began helping other children in the village with homework. Even though they had little, they shared their pencils and notebooks. The villagers started to notice how clever and kind they were. Slowly the laughter turned into respect. One afternoon, when Miri was returning from work, she heard two women talking near the well. "Do you see those twins?" one said. "They are top of their class." The other replied, "Their mother must have done something right." Miri walked past them quietly, her heart full. The twins continued to shine in school. Their teachers praised them for their discipline and intelligence. "They remind me of you, Miri," one teacher said when she came to visit. "You have given them a gift that money cannot buy, the gift of determination." Miri nodded with a smile. "It is all I have to give," she replied. As months passed, the shed became more than just a shelter. It became a home built with love. The cracks in the walls no longer mattered, and the cold nights felt warm when they sat close together. They shared laughter, stories, and dreams. Even when there was little to eat, they had hope to feed their hearts. One cold night, as the wind howled outside, Lela placed her small blanket over her mother's shoulders. "You always take care of us," she said. "Now it is our turn." Miri looked at her daughters and felt tears fall down her cheeks. "You already take care of me," she whispered. "Your kindness keeps me alive." Sometimes, when Miri walked to the fields at dawn, she would see the first light of the sun and feel strength return to her. She often said to herself, Pain is heavy but love carries it easily. Each step she took was for her daughters. Every grain she harvested, every coin she earned. Years passed slowly, but with each day the bond between mother and daughters grew stronger. They faced hunger, storms, and laughter from others, but they never gave up. Their love was their shield. And so, even though Miri lived without a house, she carried something much greater: faith, hope, and the belief that one day her daughters would rise above all struggles. Whenever people asked why she smiled despite her hardship, she always said, "My daughters will change our story." The years passed quietly in the little village of Ndalama. The seasons came and went, rains that turned the fields green and dry winds that carried the dust across the roads. Miri's hair had grown gray, her hands rougher than before, but her heart was light. Her daughters, Lela and Nia, had grown into strong young women, and their dreams were slowly turning into reality. Lela had become a teacher in a nearby town. She loved her students dearly and treated each one like her own child. She always remembered her mother's words, "Teach with kindness, for knowledge means nothing without love." Her students admired her patience and gentle voice. Every day after class she wrote letters to her mother, telling her about her work and the children who made her smile. Nia, on the other hand, had moved to the city to study medicine. The hospital where she trained was big and full of noise, very different from the quiet life of Ndalama. The days were long and tiring, but she never complained. Whenever she felt weak, she remembered her mother's cracked hands and tired smile, and that memory gave her strength. She often wrote letters to Miri too, describing how she was learning to help the sick and save lives. Every month, both sisters sent a little money home, sometimes with a small gift like soap, fabric, or tea. Miri never spent the gifts carelessly. She kept the fabric folded neatly in her wooden box, the tea in a small jar, and every letter tied together with a red ribbon. On lonely evenings she would untie the ribbon, unfold the letters, and read each one slowly by candlelight. "My daughters," she would whisper, smiling through her tears, "you have gone far, but your hearts still live here with me." The villagers began to notice the change in Miri's life. She still lived simply in the small shed, but her face always shone with peace. People no longer called her foolish, they called her Mama Miri, the wise one. Whenever young mothers complained about hard times, the elders would say, "Look at Miri. She gave everything for her children, and now her harvest has come." One morning Miri woke to the sound of birds singing outside. The sun rose gently over the fields, painting the sky in soft orange and gold. She stepped outside, stretched her back, and looked toward the horizon where the town road disappeared into the hills. "My daughters must already be awake," she thought. "Maybe they are working now, maybe they are smiling." Later that morning, the village postman came walking up the path, waving 2 envelopes in his hand. "Mama Miri," he called. "Good news for you today." Miri wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to meet him. Her heart raced as she saw her daughter's handwriting on both envelopes. She thanked the postman, sat on the old wooden bench outside, and opened the first letter. It was from Lela. "Dearest Mama," the letter began, "today I received a letter from the school board. They have offered me a permanent position as a head teacher. I will be able to help more children and teach them the way you taught us, with love and patience. I can finally send you enough to make life easier. I will visit soon." Miri pressed the letter to her chest. "My little girl, my Lela," she whispered, "you are now a teacher of teachers." With trembling hands she opened the second envelope. This one was from Nia. "Beloved Mama," it read, "I have been offered a position at the city hospital. They trust me now to work with patients on my own. I'm scared, but I am also proud. Everything I do for you. I hope one day I can build you a small clinic here in Ndalama, so you will never have to travel far when you are sick." Miri's tears fell onto the page as she read those words. Her daughters had done it. Her sacrifices, the hunger, the long days, the laughter of those who doubted her, had all turned into blessings. She lifted her eyes to the sky and said softly, "My Lord, you are good. My seeds have grown." That evening she cooked a small meal of rice and beans, her favorite dish. She sat alone, but her heart was full. She could almost hear her daughter's laughter echoing in the room. The candlelight flickered on the wall, casting shadows that looked like the twins when they were little, one holding a book, the other drawing on the floor. As the night deepened, Miri walked outside and looked at the moon. She remembered the time when the 3 of them used to sleep under the stars, their stomachs empty but their dreams full. Now those dreams had become real. She whispered to the wind, "Thank you for keeping them safe." The next few days Miri told everyone in the village the news. The women at the well clapped their hands and said, "Your daughters are a blessing." Even the chief's wife sent a small gift, a basket of yams, to congratulate her. Mary smiled and said, "All I did was believe. The rest was God's grace." One afternoon she went to the local school, carrying some of Lella's old notebooks. She showed them to the teacher and said, "These belong to my daughter. She was once a student here. Now she teaches others." The children stared at her in amazement. To them, Mary was like a living story of faith and love. At night, when she sat by the fire, she thought of the path that had brought her here. She remembered the hunger, the storms, the laughter of the villagers who mocked her. Yet through it all she had never given up. "It was worth it," she whispered. "Every pain was a step toward this joy." 1 week later, a neighbor's son brought her a small package from the town. Inside were 2 framed photographs, one of Lella standing proudly with her students, and one of Nia wearing a white coat in front of the hospital. Mary placed the photos on a wooden shelf and smiled. "Now I can see you both every morning," she said. That night she prayed longer than usual. She thanked God for every tear, every sacrifice, every moment of patience that had led to this joy. She knew her daughter's journey was still beginning, but in her heart she felt peace. The seed she had planted had truly blossomed. Before going to bed, she whispered softly to herself, "I once gave away a house, but now I have a home built with love." And as she closed her eyes, the night air carried the gentle sound of the wind through the trees, a reminder that dreams like seeds take time to grow, but they always bloom when watered by faith. The morning sun rose slowly over Ndalama, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and pink. Birds sang on the rooftops, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. It was a peaceful day, but for Miri, it was not an ordinary one. She had woken up before dawn, her heart full of excitement. Her daughters, Lella and Nia, were coming home after many years. She swept the front of her small shed, straightened the old wooden chair, and placed a small pot of flowers near the door. Though her home was simple, she wanted everything to look perfect. "They have worked hard," she whispered to herself. "They deserve to come home to peace." As the sun climbed higher, she heard the sound of a car engine in the distance. Her heart began to race. She stood still, her hands trembling slightly. Then, from behind the trees, she saw the car approaching, a small blue one shining in the morning light. The doors opened and 2 young women stepped out. "Mama," they shouted together. Mary's eyes filled with tears. She dropped the broom and ran toward them. The 3 of them met halfway, hugging tightly as if they never wanted to let go. Mary touched their faces with her rough hands, as if to make sure they were real. "My daughters," she whispered, "you have grown so beautiful." Lella laughed softly. "Mama, you still look the same, strong and full of love." Nia smiled and handed her a small basket. "We brought your favorite food, plantains and roasted fish. But there's more we want to show you." Mary looked at them curiously. "More?" "Come," Lella said, taking her hand. They walked down the narrow path that led to the open field near the mango trees. Mary noticed some men working in the distance, carrying wood and bricks. She frowned. "What is happening there?" Nia grinned and squeezed her hand. "You'll see." When they reached the edge of the field, Mary stopped in surprise. Before her stood a new house, beautiful, strong, and shining in the sunlight. The walls were smooth, the roof made of red tiles, and flowers were planted along the path leading to the front door. It looked like a dream. Mary covered her mouth with her hands. What is this?" she whispered. Lella stepped forward and said softly, "This is your home, Mama. We built it for you." Mary turned to them, her eyes wide and full of tears. You built this for me?" Nia nodded, smiling through her own tears. "You sold your home so we could learn and grow. Now it is time for us to build one for you." For a moment, Mary could not speak. She just looked at the house, then at her daughters, and then back at the house again. Her legs felt weak and she slowly sank to her knees, weeping openly. Lella and Nia knelt beside her, holding her hands. "My children," Mary said between sobs, "you have given me more than I ever dreamed. I only wanted you to have a better life, but you have given me back my home, and my pride." Nia hugged her tightly. "Mama, everything we are began with you." News of the new house spread quickly through the village. By afternoon, people began to gather around to see it. Some came out of curiosity, others out of respect. The same villagers who had once laughed at Mary now came to celebrate her. They brought food, music, and laughter. Children ran around playing while the elders sat under the tree smiling. "Mary," said one of the old women, "we used to think you were foolish for selling your home. But now we see you were wise all along. You planted your love in your children and look how it has grown." Mary smiled humbly. It was not wisdom, she said softly. It was only faith. The celebration continued into the evening. Lela stood near the door of the new house, greeting everyone with warmth. She told them how her mother's sacrifice had shaped their lives. Every time I teach a child to read, she said, I remember how my mother gave everything for me to study. Nia also spoke, standing beside her sister. I heal people because my mother once healed us with her love. She showed us that true giving never ends, it only grows. As the crowd listened, many of them wiped away tears. They had seen Miri struggle for years, how she went hungry, how she worked in the hot sun, how she faced shame without anger. Now they saw her reward. That night, after everyone had gone home, the three women sat together on the front steps of the new house. The moon was bright, and the crickets sang softly in the grass. Miri looked up at the stars, her daughters sitting beside her. When I sold our old home, she said quietly, I cried because I thought I had lost everything. But I see now, that house was never the true home. Home is here. She placed her hand over her heart. It lives in love. Lela leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. Mama, this house is just the beginning. We want to make sure you never have to work again. You can rest now. Miri chuckled softly. Rest? Maybe a little. But I still like to keep busy. Nia laughed. You never change, Mama. They sat together in peaceful silence for a long while. The night breeze carried the scent of the mango trees and the sound of distant drums from another celebration in the village. Miri closed her eyes and listened. The world felt full again, full of love, peace and gratitude. When she opened her eyes, she looked around at the home her daughters had built. She could see the strong walls, the bright windows, and the garden waiting to bloom. For the first time in many years she felt truly safe. She turned to her daughters and said softly, You have not only built a house. You have built my heart again. The twins smiled, their eyes shining in the moonlight. And you built ours first, Lela replied. Miri reached out and pulled them both into her arms. My daughters, she whispered, you are my greatest work, my greatest gift. As the stars shone above them, the night seemed to whisper its own blessing. A mother's love returned, a promise fulfilled, and a circle of sacrifice and joy completed. In that quiet moment, surrounded by warmth and peace, Miri finally felt what she had always prayed for. Her family together, her dreams alive, and her heart at rest. The morning sun was soft and golden over Ndalama village. Birds chirped on the rooftops and the laughter of children filled the air. Miri sat quietly on her wooden chair on the veranda, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was now silver like moonlight, and her hands showed the signs of many years of hard work, but her eyes were bright, calm and full of peace. In front of her, the schoolyard was alive with joy. Children ran around, their laughter ringing through the air. Some carried books, others played with sticks, and a few sat under a tree reading aloud. On the front of the school building were painted the words, The Miri Academy of Hope. Each time Miri looked at that name, her heart filled with pride and gratitude. Her daughters, Lela and Nia, had built the school 5 years earlier. They wanted to give poor children the chance to study, just as their mother had once given them. Every morning they came to visit Miri before going to work. Today was special though. The school was celebrating its anniversary, and many people had come from other towns to honor Miri's story. Mama, called Nia, walking toward her with a gentle smile. She wore a neat blue dress, her stethoscope hanging around her neck. The guests are arriving soon. Are you ready? Miri smiled. My dear, I've been ready since the day you told me this school would carry my name. Lela joined them, holding a basket of flowers. She placed them on the veranda and kissed her mother's cheek. The children are waiting for you to speak today, Mama. They want to hear your story in your own words. Miri chuckled softly. Ah, my story. I'm not sure what to tell them. It is just a story of a poor woman who sold her home. Lela shook her head gently. It is more than that. It is the story of courage, faith, and love. It is the story that made us who we are. Soon, a small crowd began to gather in front of the school. There were teachers, parents, and visitors from nearby towns. Many had heard of Miri's sacrifice and wanted to meet the woman whose love had changed so many lives. A small stage had been set up under a large tree. Children stood with flowers in their hands, waiting to welcome her. When Miri stepped forward, the crowd began to clap. She walked slowly, her steps steady, her smile kind. The children ran up to her, handing her flowers, and she thanked each one gently. She sat on a wooden chair on the stage while everyone settled down. The village chief spoke first. Today we celebrate not only this school, he said, but also the heart behind it. Miri's story teaches us that true riches are not found in gold or land, but in love that gives and never gives up. Then he turned to her and said, Mama Miri, please share your words with us. The crowd grew quiet. Miri looked around at the faces, young and old, rich and poor, all waiting to hear her speak. She took a deep breath and began in her gentle voice. When I was younger, she said, I had very little. My only treasure was my 2 daughters. When their school fees became too high, I had to make a choice. I could keep my house or I could give them a future. I chose their future. Some people nodded, others wiped tears from their eyes. It was not easy, she continued. I worked in the sun. I went hungry many nights. People laughed at me and said I was foolish. But I never lost faith. I knew that if my daughters studied, one day they would change our story. She paused and looked toward Lela and Nia, who were standing at the side, their eyes shining with pride. Now, Miri said softly, they have given me more than I ever dreamed. They gave me this school, a place where children can learn and hope. So, do I regret selling my home? She smiled gently and shook her head. No. A house is made of walls, but love builds a future. The crowd clapped loudly, some standing to honor her. Tears filled many eyes. Even the children, though they didn't fully understand her words, felt the love and strength in her voice. After her speech, the celebration began. The children sang songs they had written about hope and family. One song had a line that said, Love builds where bricks cannot. Miri smiled through her tears as she listened. Later, when the guests had eaten and laughter filled the air, Miri sat quietly again on her veranda, watching the sunset. Lela and Nia sat beside her. The sound of the children's voices still echoed in the distance. Mama, Nia said softly, do you remember when we had nothing? When we used to sleep on the floor and eat 1 meal a day? Miri nodded slowly. Yes, my dear. I remember. But I also remember the laughter we shared even then. We were poor, but our hearts were rich. Lela smiled and held her mother's hand. Now, because of you, hundreds of children will never have to choose between hunger and learning. Miri's eyes softened as she looked at the school. That is the true reward, she whispered. Not the house, not the name, but the smiles of those children. A gentle wind passed through the trees, carrying the smell of the evening flowers. The lamps in the school courtyard began to glow. Miri leaned back in her chair, her heart full. From the road nearby, some travelers passed by and waved. That is Mama Miri, one of them said proudly. The woman who gave everything for love. Miri smiled faintly. She never thought her story would travel beyond her village, yet here she was, known far and wide as a symbol of hope. When night fell and the stars appeared, she looked up at the sky and whispered, Thank you, God, for giving me more than I ever lost. The moonlight touched her face softly. In that quiet moment she felt the presence of peace, the kind that comes after years of struggle and love. She thought of the past, the small house she had sold, the nights she had cried, the days she had gone hungry. But all of it now felt far away, like a dream she had already woken from. Her heart was full of gratitude. Her daughters were doing well, the village respected her, and children she had never met before called her Mama Miri. She had no riches of gold or land, but her life was rich in love, legacy, and peace. Before going inside, she whispered once more to herself, A house is made of walls, but love builds a future. And as the stars twinkled above Ndalama, the sound of children's laughter rose again from the Miri Academy of Hope, a sound that told the world that one woman's sacrifice had built 1,000 dreams.